The first time I learned my son had stolen my identity, I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, reading a collection notice for a $180,000 business loan I had never signed. The paper shook in my hand. Not because I was weak, but because my mind was trying to reject what my eyes had already understood. My full legal name was printed across the top. My social security number was listed on the second page. My old home address, my driver's license number, even the name of my late wife were written into the application, as if my life had been opened, copied, and sold before I could even breathe. My son walked in through the back door. Even saw the notice in my hand and did not ask what was wrong. He did not act surprised. He only glanced at the paper, then smiled like I was the one in trouble. He said nobody was going to believe an old man over his own son. Then my phone buzzed on the table. It was a fraud alert from the bank. The loan application had been submitted from an office computer registered to my son's company. In that moment, the kitchen went silent except for the refrigerator humming behind me. I stared at Evan, this grown man I had once carried on my shoulders, and finally understood that he had not come to visit his father. He had come to see whether I had discovered the crime. My name is Thomas Whitmore. I am 73 years old, retired from the United States Postal Service after 38 years of walking streets, and climbing frozen porch steps and delivering letters to people who rarely knew my name. I was never rich, I never pretended to be, but I was careful. I was the kind of man who folded receipts, labeled folders, paid bills before they were due, and believed that if you lived honestly long enough, your family would at least remember what honesty had cost you. My wife, Margaret, used to laugh at how organized I was. She said I treated our filing cabinet like it was Fort Knox, but she never complained when that same cabinet helped us pay off our mortgage early and send Even to college and keep food on the table during years when every dollar had a job before it even reached my hand. Margaret was the soft place in our home. She made Sunday dinners even when she was tired. And she remembered every birthday, every neighbor's surgery, every teacher who had been kind to our son. She had a way of making people feel forgiven before they apologized. When Ivan was a boy, she kept his drawings on the refrigerator until the corners curled. When he became a teenager and slammed doors, she left sandwiches outside his room. When he became a man and made reckless choices, she begged me to help him one more time, and I did. I helped him more times than I should have. When Ivan dropped out of his first college program, I paid the remaining fees so his credit would not be damaged. When he wrecked his first car, I covered the insurance gap. When he said he wanted to start a digital marketing business, I gave him $25,000 from a savings account Margaret and I had built for a retirement trip to Maine. When that business failed, I told myself failure was part of learning. When he started another company, I co-signed a small equipment lease because he promised this time would be different. A father can hear the same promise many times and still want to believe it. After Margaret died from a stroke, the house changed shape. The rooms were the same, but the warmth had gone quiet. Her coffee mug stayed in the cabinet. Her garden gloves stayed by the back door. Her reading glasses remained on the nightstand for almost a year because moving them felt like admitting something my heart was not ready to accept. Evan came around more often after her funeral. At first, I thought grief had softened him. He brought groceries. He asked about my prescriptions. He told me I should not be alone so much. His wife, Nicole, began calling me Dad, though she had barely spoken to me that warmly while Margaret was alive. I wanted to believe they were trying. Looking back, I think they were counting. They counted the house. They counted my pension. They counted Margaret's life insurance. They counted the savings account. They counted my good credit. They counted everything except the years I had spent building it. That was the part that still hurts. Money can be stolen with a signature. Trust takes a lifetime to replace. The first strange sign came 2 months after Margaret's death, when Nicole asked where I kept our tax returns. She asked it casually. While rinsing a coffee cup at my sink, she said Evan needed old records for a business grant and wondered if I had copies of anything that showed family income history. The question felt odd, but grief makes a man slow to suspect people sitting in his own kitchen. I told her the tax files were in the metal cabinet in the den. She smiled too quickly. After that, small things began to move. A folder I kept on the second shelf appeared on the bottom shelf. My passport was not in the envelope where I had left it. A copy of my driver's license, which Margaret had once made for travel paperwork, disappeared from a file marked identification. When I asked Even about it, he said I was probably misplacing things. He said that happened to people after loss. He said grief could make memory unreliable. The way he said it bothered me. He sounded less concerned than prepared. Then came the questions. Even asked whether my credit was still frozen from the time a department store card had been opened fraudulently years earlier. Nicole asked if my bank used two-factor authentication. And Evan asked whether Margaret's name had been removed from joint accounts. Nickel asked whether I still used the same email password Margaret had written down in her recipe drawer. And none of those questions came all at once. That was the clever part. They arrived slowly, wrapped in concern, spaced out across dinners and phone calls and errands. But a retired postal worker notices patterns. Routes teach you that. A different car on the same block. Every Tuesday means something. A mailbox suddenly overflowing means something. A son asking about your identity documents while his business is failing means something. And by spring, even S Company had started to crack. He had employees leaving, vendors calling, and a landlord threatening to sue over unpaid rent on his office space. He told me the economy was bad. And he told me clients were slow to pay. He told me one big contract would solve everything if he could just hold on another month. I had heard that tone before. It was the voice he used right before asking for money. This time, I told him no, not because I did not love him. I told him no because Margaret's death had left me with enough silence to finally hear my own common sense. I told him I had helped before and could not keep doing it. I told him I needed to protect my retirement. His face changed, only for a second. Then he smiled, leaned back in his chair, and said he understood. 2 weeks later, a bank called to verify an application I had never submitted. And the call came on a Tuesday morning, while I was trimming dead leaves from Margaret's basil plant on the kitchen windowsill. The woman on the phone said she was from Northbridge Commercial Lending, and she asked if I had a moment to confirm details for my business expansion loan. I almost laughed because I had not owned a business in my life. I had carried mail, I had fixed gutters, and I had helped neighbors shovel snow, but I had never needed a commercial loan. I told her there must be a mistake. She paused, then asked whether I was Thomas Edward Whitmore, born May 14, 1952. She confirmed my address. She confirmed the last 4 digits of my social security number. She mentioned a company called Whitmore Digital Holdings, a business I had never heard of, and said the loan amount was $180,000. My mouth went dry. I told her I had signed nothing. That was when she became careful. Professional quiet. She said the loan had already been funded 3 weeks earlier. Funded. That word sat in my chest like a stone. I called Ivan before calling the police. That is the shameful truth. Even with the evidence forming in front of me, some part of me still wanted there to be an explanation, and some mistake, some misunderstanding, some version of events where my son had not used my name like a stolen key. He came over within 20 minutes too fast, and he walked into the kitchen wearing his expensive watch and the gray coat I had helped him buy for client meetings. Nickel came with him, holding her phone in one hand and her sunglasses in the other, and they looked less like worried family and more like people arriving at a negotiation they had expected. I placed the collection notice on the table. Ivan looked at it and sighed, and, as if I had created an inconvenience, he said I should not panic. He said it was temporary. He said the loan had been necessary to keep the company afloat, and that he had planned to tell me after the next round of payments came in. And Nickel added that family helped family, especially when one person had resources sitting unused. Unused, that was the word she chose for my life savings and my credit. I told them they had no right, and Evan's face hardened. He leaned over my kitchen table, the same table where Margaret had served him meatloaf and birthday cake and hot tea when he was sick, and he said nobody would believe I did not sign it. And he said the paperwork was clean. He said I was old, recently widowed, and confused enough that any accusation I made would look like grief talking. Nickel touched his arm, but she did not stop him. And then Evan said the cruelest thing of all. He said Margaret would have wanted me to help him instead of acting selfish with money. I was not going to need much longer for a moment. I could not move. He had stolen my identity, risked my home, endangered my credit, and then used his dead mother as a shield. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw him out. And I wanted to ask when the boy I raised had become the kind of man who could look at his father and see collateral. Instead, I folded the collection notice once. Then twice, I told him to leave. And he smiled again, smaller this time, and said I should think carefully before making enemies of my only family. That was when something inside me went still. Not cold clear after Evan left. I locked the back door for the first time in 20 years. That small click sounded louder than it should have. It felt like a line being drawn through my own house. I did not call him again that day. I did not answer Nickel's messages. I did not accuse anyone online, did not call relatives, did not tell neighbors. I had spent decades delivering certified letters, court notices, and tax forms and bank statements. I knew something most angry people forget. Paper matters, dates matter, proof matters. The truth needs legs if it is going to walk into a room and survive. And so I began quietly. I called Northbridge Commercial Lending and asked for every document connected to the loan. The first representative refused, saying business accounts required verification. I told her I was reporting identity theft and needed their fraud department. My voice was calm enough that she stopped reading from her script. By the end of the call, a fraud investigator named Marlene had opened a case. I called my bank next. They found 2 recent attempts to link an outside business account to my personal checking. Both attempts had failed because Margaret, years earlier, had insisted we require phone verification for any new transfer connection. I never thanked her for that. I wish I had. Then I called the credit bureaus and froze everything. I filed an identity theft report. I requested copies of credit inquiries. I changed every password I had, including the old email account. Even thought I barely used, that was where I found the first real trail. A deleted message was sitting in the recovery folder. It was from a document verification service. And the subject line said my loan packet was complete. The email had been opened 3 weeks earlier from a device I did not own. I printed it. Then I remembered the missing driver's license copy in the tax folder. Nickel at my sink asking where we kept old returns. Even asking about my credit freeze, I opened the metal filing cabinet in the den and checked every folder. Margaret's organization saved me again. She had used sticky notes, dates, and paper clips like a private security system. When something was missing, the absence left a shape. The 2021 tax return copy was gone. The photocopy of my license was gone. A page with my social security number, once attached to a pension packet, was gone. But whoever took them had missed something. Margaret had made duplicate indexes of important files. On the back of one index card, in her handwriting, she had written, "Copies given to Even for mortgage help, March 2019. Do not give again." That note made my throat tighten even years ago. She had been more cautious than I was that night. I sat in the den beneath the yellow desk lamp and started a folder of my own. I labeled it Fraud Evidence. I placed every printed email, banknote, call log, and missing document list inside. Then I wrote a timeline by hand. At the top of the page I wrote one sentence. My son thought grief made me weak. Then I underlined it once. The secret came from an old friend named Daniel Mercer. Daniel and I had grown up on the same street in Des Moines. He had become an accountant first, then a forensic financial investigator, and then a consultant who worked with federal agencies on wire fraud and identity theft cases. We had not spoken much after Margaret's funeral, but when I called and explained what had happened, he went silent in a way that told me he was taking notes in his head. He told me not to confront Even again. He told me not to warn Nickel. He told me not to delete anything, not to forward anything without preserving headers, and not to let my anger outrun the evidence. Then he asked me to send him copies through a secure portal. 2 days later, Daniel called back. His voice had changed. He said the loan application was not just a family matter. It involved interstate wire transmission, falsified identity documents, digital signature fraud, and funds moved through a business account connected to Evan's company. He said Northbridge had already flagged inconsistencies after my report. He also said the digital signature platform had recorded metadata. I did not know what metadata meant in detail. Daniel explained it simply. Every electronic signature leaves footprints, an IP address, device type, timestamp, browser information, and sometimes geolocation. The application had not been signed from my house. It had been signed from Evan's office network at 11:48 p.m. on a Wednesday. There was more. The uploaded driver's license image matched the missing copy from my filing cabinet. Not a fresh scan, a paper photocopy. The edge shadow was visible. And the tax document used for income verification included an old page. Margaret had marked with a blue ink dot in the corner. Daniel noticed it because I had scanned the remaining folder pages for him. And Margaret's system matched the stolen copy. Then Northbridge sent the business records. The company listed on the loan was Whitmore Digital Holdings. Look, I had never heard that name because Even had created it 6 weeks earlier. He made himself managing member but used my name and credit as guarantor. The bank account receiving the loan funds belonged to the LC. Within 5 days of funding, money had been transferred to Evan's overdue office lease, a business credit card, Nicholas Boutique Consulting Company, and a luxury car payment. I stared at that page longer than any other. Not because it proved fraud, because it proved purpose. And this had not been desperation in a single bad moment. This had been planned. Documents stolen, company formed, application submitted, funds moved, lies prepared. And Daniel told me he had a contact in a federal financial crimes unit who could review the evidence. He warned me that involving authorities could change everything. Evan could face real charges. And Nicole, too, if she participated. I looked at Margaret's photograph on the bookshelf. She was standing in our garden, wearing a sun hat and holding tomatoes in both hands. She had spent 49 years protecting our family from hunger, debt, shame, and loneliness, and our son had repaid that life by using her widower as a credit line. I told Daniel to send the file, not because I wanted revenge, because if I stayed silent, Ivan would learn that stealing from his father had no cost. Ivan began to panic when the lender froze the business account. I knew because his tone changed. First came the friendly calls. He said we needed to talk like adults. He said outside people did not understand family. He said banks made mistakes all the time and that reporting things too aggressively could damage everyone. When I did not answer, Nicole started texting. Her messages were polished and poisonous. She wrote that Evan was under terrible pressure. She wrote that Margaret would be heartbroken to see me turning on my own blood. She wrote that at my age, stress could be dangerous, and perhaps it was time for someone else to help manage communications before I hurt myself. There it was again, the suggestion that I was not capable. The next afternoon, Evan came to my house with my cousin Robert. Robert was a decent man but easily impressed by confidence. Yvonne had clearly told him some version of the story where I was confused, overreacting, and threatening to destroy my own son over a paperwork misunderstanding. They found me in the garage labeling boxes of Margaret's old holiday decorations. Evan spoke gently in front of Robert, too gently. He said I had been through a lot. He said grief had made me suspicious. He said I had always helped him before, and this time I had simply forgotten agreeing to support the loan. Forgotten. That word was another stolen document. I asked him to show me proof I had agreed. He said families should not need proof. I almost laughed at that. A man who had forged my signature was now asking me to trust him because we shared a last name. When Robert stepped outside to take a phone call, Ivan's mask slipped. He moved closer and told me I had no idea how much trouble I was causing. He said if his company collapsed, employees would lose jobs. He said Nicole could lose her consulting contracts. He said their mortgage could fall behind. Then he said that if I pushed this into a legal fight, he would tell everyone I was declining mentally and had offered to help. Before forgetting, he said he had emails that could make me look unstable. That was a mistake because threats are evidence when a man is smart enough to record them. My phone had been recording from the workbench. After that, they escalated faster. Nicole called my Dr. S office, pretending to be authorized to discuss my medical status. The receptionist, who had known Margaret for years, refused and noted the call. Even tried to access my credit report through an online monitoring service. The attempt triggered another alert. Someone filed a change of address request for my mail to be forwarded to a private mailbox near Ivan's office. The postal inspector took that one personally. That last part mattered. I had spent nearly 4 decades working for the Postal Service. I knew mail fraud was not a family disagreement. It was federal ground. Daniel told me the case had crossed lines Yvonne did not understand. Identity theft, wire fraud, mail interference, false commercial lending documents. He said a federal agent wanted to meet me in person, so we set the trap without calling it one. I invited Evan and Nicole to dinner the following Sunday. I told them I was tired. I told them I wanted to resolve everything privately. I told them they could bring whatever documents they thought I needed to sign. Ivan agreed too quickly. That told me he still believed I was afraid. He did not know I had invited 3 other people, my attorney, a bank fraud investigator, and a federal agent named Rebecca Sloan. And Sunday dinner used to be sacred in our house. Margaret believed families stayed together by sitting at the same table even when the week had been hard. She made pot roast, green beans, mashed potatoes, and apple pie. Even used to sneak bits of crust from the cooling rack while she pretended not to notice. That Sunday I made coffee and nothing else. I was done feeding people who came to my table hungry for control. Even arrived in a navy suit carrying a folder. Nicole wore a beige coat and the same careful smile she used when speaking to bank tellers, receptionists, and older relatives she thought she could steer. They looked relieved when they saw me alone in the dining room. That relief lasted less than 30 seconds. My attorney, Grace Mallory, stepped in from the den first. She was 60 and sharp-eyed and calm in a way that made louder people seem childish. Then Marlene from Northbridge Commercial Lending entered with a black binder. Finally, Agent Rebecca Sloan walked in wearing a dark blazer and plain shoes, and the unmistakable expression of someone who had heard too many lies to be impressed by another one. Yvonne stared at her badge. Nicole stopped smiling. I asked everyone to sit, and nobody did at first. Grace began by explaining that the meeting was being documented and that I had not agreed to any private settlement, even interrupted saying this was a family issue. Agent Sloan looked at him and said identity theft involving commercial lending and electronic transmission of forged documents was not simply a family issue. The room changed after that. Marlene opened the binder and placed the loan application on the table. She showed my name as guarantor. She showed the electronic signature. She showed the uploaded identification and tax records. Then she showed the metadata report. The IP address belonged to Ivan's office. The timestamp matched security access logs from his building. The browser fingerprint matched a computer assigned to his company administrator. Nicole looked at Ivan then, not with shock, but with anger that he had failed to keep the room under control. Grace placed the missing document list beside the loan packet. She showed the index card in Margaret's handwriting. and she showed copies of the remaining tax folder pages with the same blue ink mark that appeared on the uploaded document. She showed the fraud alerts, the blocked bank link attempts, and the change of address request. Then I played the recording from the garage. Ivan's own voice filled the dining room. He was telling me he would make me look mentally unstable, and he was telling me I had no idea how much trouble I was causing. He was telling me people would believe him before they believed an old widower. I watched his face as he listened to himself, and for the first time he looked ashamed. But shame came second. Fear came first. Agent Sloan asked him whether he wanted to make a statement. Grace advised him to think carefully before answering. Nicole sat very still, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. Even tried to say I had agreed verbally. Marlene asked why, if that were true. The application had been submitted from his office at night, using stolen copies instead of from my home, with a proper notary. He had no answer. Then Nicole made her mistake. She said I had always intended to help. But after Margaret died, I became confused and paranoid. She said they were only trying to protect the family from my emotional decisions. Agent Sloan opened her folder and read the note from my Dr. S. office documenting Nicholas' unauthorized call. Then she read the credit access attempt, then the mail forwarding request. Nicholas' face went pale. I had imagined this moment many times. I thought I would feel satisfaction, maybe even triumph. But all I felt was a deep, tired sadness. Even was still my son that did not disappear because a federal agent sat at my dining room table. But love had stopped being a blindfold. I stood and placed Margaret's photograph in the center of the table. I told Even that his mother spent her life keeping this family out of debt, and he used her death to drag fraud into her house. I told him he had not borrowed from me, he had stolen from me. I told him I would not lie to save him from the consequences of telling lies about me. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Agent Sloan closed her folder and said the matter would proceed through proper channels. That was the sound of my son finally losing control of the story. The first consequence was not an arrest. It was silence. Ivan stopped calling for 2 days. Nicole stopped texting. Robert left a voicemail apologizing for letting himself be used. Northbridge froze the loan file, suspended collections against me, and began its internal fraud process. The credit bureaus removed the inquiry from my profile pending the identity theft investigation. My bank added extra security to every account. And for the first time in weeks, I woke up without checking my phone before my feet touched the floor. Then the legal letters came. Grace filed formal notices disputing the debt and preserving my rights as an identity theft victim. Northbridge confirmed in writing that I would not be held responsible while the fraud investigation continued. The postal inspector contacted me about the attempted mail forwarding. Agent Sloan's office requested original copies of the documents I had preserved. Paper moved, and with every page, Ivan's lies had less room to breathe. His company collapsed within a month. Not because I destroyed it, but because it had already been hollow. Vendors learned of the investigation. A major client paused payment. His landlord locked him out after missed rent. Nicholas Consulting Company, which had received part of the loan money, lost 2 contracts when the connection became known. People who had admired their polished life began asking where the money had really come from. Even tried one last time to make me save him. He came to my house on a rainy evening, soaked through his coat, standing on the porch like a boy who had stayed out too late. I opened the door but did not invite him in, and he said he was sorry. I asked what he was sorry for. He cried then, or tried to. He said he was sorry things got out of hand. Sorry I felt betrayed. Sorry the bank misunderstood. And sorry Nicole pushed him. Sorry the business pressure made him desperate. Not once did he say he was sorry for stealing my name. So I told him the truth. I told him desperation explains pressure, not fraud. I told him grief explains weakness, not cruelty. I told him needing help is human, but using your father's identity and then calling him too old to fight back is something else entirely. He asked if I wanted him to go to prison. That question hurt because it showed he still thought this was about what I wanted. It was not. It was about what he had done. I told him. I wanted him to become honest before life forced honesty on him. Then I closed the door. In the months that followed, the debt was formally removed from my name. My credit was restored. Northbridge pursued recovery through legal channels. Even and Nicole faced charges tied to identity theft, wire fraud, and false loan documents. Their attorney tried to frame it as a family misunderstanding, but metadata does not care about family stories. Bank records do not soften because someone cries. They sold their house before the year ended. Some relatives said I had gone too far. Most said nothing. People become very quiet when proof replaces gossip. I did not celebrate. I changed my will. Even was removed from any direct inheritance. If there was ever to be help for him, it would go through a strict trust controlled by someone who could say no without shaking. Nicole was removed completely. The rest of my estate was redirected towards something Margaret would have understood, a scholarship fund for students studying fraud prevention. and cybersecurity, and elder financial protection. I wanted young people to learn how to stop what my son had done. I wanted my pain to become a locked door for someone else. A year after the collection notice arrived, I drove to the cemetery with a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and a copy of the scholarship announcement. Margaret's grave sits under a maple tree near the older section, and where the stones are simpler and the grass grows unevenly after heavy rain. I brushed leaves from her marker and sat beside her the way I had sat beside her hospital bed, with one hand resting near her name. I told her everything. I told her about the loan, though some part of me believed she already knew. I told her about Ivan, Nickel, the investigation, the porch, the lies, and the way our kitchen had become a courtroom without a judge. I told her I was sorry. I had ignored warning signs she would have seen sooner. I told her I was sorry. I had mistaken rescuing our son for loving him. Well, the wind moved through the maple branches above me, and for a moment, I could almost hear her telling me to stop blaming myself for another man's choices. The scholarship fund launched that fall at the local community college. The first recipient was a young woman named Elena Martinez, whose grandmother had lost money to a phone scam. Elena wanted to study digital forensics. At the small award ceremony, she shook my hand and said the scholarship made her feel like someone believed older people were worth protecting. I had to look away when she said that because for months I had felt foolish. Foolish for trusting my son. Foolish for leaving documents where family could find them. And foolish for not understanding technology fast enough to stop the damage before it began. But Elena's words gave the pain a different shape. I had not only survived something ugly, I had turned it into a warning light. My life became quieter after that. I installed better locks. I moved important papers to a secure box. I learned how to use password managers and fraud alerts and credit freezes. Mrs. Alvarez from the bank helped me set up safeguards I should have had years earlier. Grace checked in every few months. Daniel and I started having breakfast on the first Friday of every month. And two old men talking about baseball, scams, and how fast the world had changed while we were busy earning a living. Even wrote from time to time his letters were different from his old messages, less polished, more broken. In the first one, he still blamed pressure. In the second, he blamed shame. By the third, he wrote the sentence I had waited a long time to see. And he wrote that he stole from me because he thought I would forgive him before anyone could punish him. That was the first true thing he had said. I did not rush to answer. And forgiveness is not a button a father presses because a son finally finds the right words. It is slower than that, heavier. It requires truth to stay true after the consequences arrive. Months later, I wrote back. I told him I loved him. I told him I was angry. I told him those two things could live in the same house, but he could not live in mine until trust had a foundation again. I told him that if he wanted a relationship, it would begin with accountability, not access, no money, no documents, no excuses, only honesty, one small piece at a time. I do not know what we will become. Some stories do not end with a family restored around a dinner table. Some end with a locked file cabinet, a clean credit report, and an old man finally understanding that protecting himself is not the opposite of love. It is proof that his life still belongs to him. On the anniversary of Margaret's death, I made her pot roast recipe for the first time since she passed. I burned the carrots a little, and she would have teased me for that. I ate at the kitchen table with her photograph across from me, and the scholarship letter beside my plate. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt like a place where someone had stolen from me. It felt like a place I had defended. Before bed, I checked the locks, turned off the kitchen light, and paused in the hallway where Margaret used to hang our family photos. Ivan's picture was still there. I had not taken it down. I did not know if that made me weak or hopeful. Maybe it made me a father, but beside that photo I placed the first scholarship thank you note, a reminder that blood can betray you, but truth can still build something clean from the wreckage. And for the first time in a long time, I slept through the night without fear of what my own son might do before morning.